Okay, welcome to the first lesson, COMP392, Lesson 1, Part 1, here at Centennial, and it's advanced graphics that we're in today. So if you're not in advanced graphics, like I said, if you're a watcher, you're totally cool, you can stick around. This is a we do together class. This is not a you watch class and I do class. That's bad. And you'll notice it'll be bad because there's a lot of stuff to do, not a lot of time to do it, right? So please fire up the machine in front of you because we're going to be interactive. This is not just a lab lecture split. I'm not going to do all lecture one class and then lab the next class. I don't do that. I kind of intercut between or interleave between, you know, lab and lecture. That's how it goes. Again, you can find me live on YouTube right now, broadcasting. This is what we're doing. If you go to YouTube and if I look at youtube.com and if I put in my channel, which is a double T in my last name, or T in my last name, first initial last name, you'll see this, and then you'll probably see, because this is not me, this is what you'll be seeing as a new visitor. You'll be seeing this little link that says, hey, live now, COMP392 Lesson 1 Part 1, right? And then you can actually, if you clicked on this, you would actually be able to watch it live from home or anywhere else, as long as I'm able to broadcast that particular class. Okay, so that's really how it's going to be looking. Let's talk about some class norms, right? Stuff like, you know, when you come in, I'm going to be starting right away, right? I'll be conducting tests, like I said, pretty much every week, right? So it'll be a little quiz. It'll be like 5, maybe 10 questions max. It'll give you like 5 minutes to finish it off, and it'll be is stuff around the previous week, right? So anything I've talked about, there might be a piece of code that might say something like, so what does this code do? A, B, C, D, you know, kind of. There'll be multiple choice. You'll be marked on it right away, and you'll get results right away, right? So kind of a quick and dirty kind of here's testing your knowledge and how you feel that you're doing. And at the end, if you think about that, if I do it every single class, and if I do one test on week 4, one test on week 11, which is kind of the plan, right? And then a midterm and a final exam, if I do those, there's 4 classes, not including this one, let's say 5 weeks that I don't do the quiz, because the rest of the weeks, there's only 14 weeks, so you're probably going to have like 9 quizzes, right, in this thing, because the rest of the time there is time we can do that, right, in that way. But there's going to be some times we can't because there's actually a test. There's not going to be a quiz when there's a test day, right? And I'll let you guys know ahead of time in the class schedule when there's stuff happening. So quizzes, you miss, it's gone. It's 1% of your final mark that I'm looking at right now. So that means if there's 9 quizzes, right, as an example, that's 9% that you'll be losing if you don't attend class. That's pretty significant, right? So I recommend that you come in, but it's up to you. Attendance isn't mandatory. If you don't want to come in, if you want to watch stuff live on YouTube, and you feel you're good enough with the bonus points, because there's always bonus points to every one of my assignments, that you can make up for some of the lost marks, then certainly you can do that as well. It's up to you. You're paying for this, right? And I'm trying to deliver the best I can for you guys, right? So just kind of putting it out there so that you know where we're standing with all that stuff. Let's take a look at the just the outline really quickly. It's also should be up on your eCentennial at this point. There are some minor changes that we're going to go through, and again, I will also produce a kind of a course plan. So there's a course outline. When we give you a course plan with more kind of detailed dates that kind of narrow in on when things are going to be due and so on. All right. So if we look at this thing, there are some objectives that we're going to be dealing with for sure. But the stuff I really want to zero in on are things like this. Test 1, Test 2, and Test 3. It says like 20, 20, and 15. They're pretty heavy duty, right? So I'm probably going to break that out in a little bit more granular. It might be like Test 1, which would probably be week 4, right? So just FYI, that's when it's going to be. And I'll give you a course plan by the end of the week. That means Wednesday for you guys, right? Most likely it's going to be worth 10%. Your midterm is probably going to be worth like 15. And then, you know, there'll be another test, another 10, and then again another 15 by the end. So that it'll break it up, that 45 or 55% of tests. It'll break it up into, kind of smaller chunks, so they're not that big. Because I don't want to make it so that they're huge, the actual exams and so on. Assignments, it says like there's 35% for assignments and so on. That might be a bit larger. I might grow that a little bit. Hello, late people. How you doing? so that there again, I'm probably going to make it if I was to do three assignments, right? Like A1, A2, A3, and each of them are worth 10%, which is probably what they're going to be. That's like 30% right there in terms of assignments. So each of them will be equally weighted. They won't be like one greater than the other. So if you don't do well in one, if you do better in another one, it'll kind of balance out. And they'll probably be kind of a larger project, which will probably be worth about 20. So instead of about 35, I'm going to up the assignment level to about, because I'm more of a practical assignment kind of based guy, to about 55%. So slightly different than what we're seeing here. And again, I'm going to produce a course plan for you so it's all laid out for you so there's no surprises because I don't like that. Again, labs, what we're going to do is if there's something where I need you to do a lab, and there is a lab for today, by the way, that's due by the end of the week, that I'm going to be giving you today. It's very simple and silly, and we've done it before, but for those people who have never done it before, then you're going to do it with me today. Then we'll talk about that, and they'll be outlined up on eCentennial. Everything, for example, will be up on eCentennial. You'll get all your marks on eCentennial. There'll be labs. Everything will be detailed up there, especially all the documents that you need to read through for your assignments. My exams, typically what I try and do is do practical exams as opposed to true, false, multiple choice. You get enough of those, right? If we do like 9 quizzes or 10 quizzes, then why am I going to do quizzes on the exam? Or that's insane. So you're going to have to do something for the exam, which means you need to know what you're doing, right? So please don't give your assignments to other people to do for you. I'm just putting it out there, right? Because it just happens every single semester that somebody thinks their Google foo is stronger than mine, right? And I'll tell you right now, I'm pretty good at catching people who cheat. So please don't do that. You're just cheating yourself. So I'd ask you not to do that. I'm going to say it one time, and that's it. But it's out there, right? So again, all of my exams are going to be practical. Chances are I'm going to run them like a little bit of a challenge, right? So whoever finishes the exam first is going to get a bit of a bonus, right? I'm always going to give a 5% bonus whoever finishes first, right? So it's going to be a challenge, right? Like that. And the reason for that is because I want you guys to be, to be the best you can be, and that's kind of competitiveness. I think is a good thing to have in the class, right? So that's really where I'm putting it out there. So it's going to be a little different than what you see here. I'm just letting you know up front so that you don't get surprised. We will be changing the outline. I've been working with Durendra to change this outline. So it's a little bit outdated, and that's why I'm going to come up with a course plan for you guys to have so you guys are clear about what's happening. The book. We have what he recommends for you, and I'm just going to see if it's probably up here. The book. It's kind of a good book that I do recommend you get. There are digital copies you can get. It's a packed book, and it's called 3JS, the JavaScript 3D library for WebGL, Pack Publishing. This one here is 2013, but there's a newer version. It's version 2, which actually was written last year, 2015, right? So fairly recent. And that's the book that you want to get. This book here, Learning 3JS. I'm going to be following the book pretty much chapter for chapter in terms of the kinds of learning we're going to do. And then I'm going to bolster that learning with assignments that are related. All right, so you're going to get an assignment that you're going to build something with that assignment. It's going to be worth 10%. It's going to be an individual assignment. All your assignments are individual, like A1, 2, 3. And then your project you can share with somebody else and produce something at the end, which is kind of cool. Okay. So that's really the plan. Let's take a look at some lessons that we're going to go through. So again, today, creating a 3D scene. This is pretty accurate in terms of what we're going to be doing. We're going to start creating a 3D scene. I'm also going to be talking about some ancillary tools, right? You need to know Git and GitHub in this course. It's kind of the first thing we're going to be doing. This is where I store all my files and everything else for people who don't know me. So your first lab today, and if you look up online now, go up on eCentennial, please. You'll see that there's a lab that I want you to sign up for GitHub, right? If you already signed up, all I need to is to give me one of your repositories on GitHub. If you don't have a repository, please create one, right? And I want you to shoot me that repository in a text file, right? So the link to that repository is all I need. I don't need anything else. And we're going to be talking about other things this semester with Git. One of the things I'm going to be doing with GitHub is I've created a team called COMP392 under Centennial College. I kind of own the Centennial College GitHub repository, the organization. I don't know how I got that, but I got it, so it's there. So it'll be Centennial College. It'll be a team called COMP392, and then underneath that team, I'm going to ask all of you guys to join under that team. As soon as I get the information about what the the name of your account is, I'm going to add you in as collaborators, right? So you'll have access to all my files on GitHub, and I'll have access to all your files on GitHub. We're going to be sharing files on GitHub all the time, so getting comfortable with using Git and GitHub is going to be one of the requirements in this course, and I'll be testing you on it. Okay, so again, ancillary technologies we talked about before. So we're going to be talking about that today, right? Stuff like how to set up your environment and all that kind of stuff. Because we need to be able to set up our environment properly in order for us to do 3D with WebGL, right? We will not be using things like Visual Studio or things like Dreamweaver or anything else like commercial grade like that. We'll be using a text editor. It's going to be VS Code, and I'm going to go into that with you in a second. Okay, so kind of week 1, we're going to be covering chapter 1. If you notice, it kind of progresses just like that. Chapter 2, chapter 3 from the book, chapter 4, and so on. Notice that there isn't any game to this particular course. There isn't something that says, hey, let's make a game, right? It doesn't really show you, the book doesn't show you how to make games. The book shows you how to use 3D with WebGL and JavaScript, right? And I'm going to be using the book as a reference and modifying it by using TypeScript. All right, so we're not going to be using just strictly JavaScript because JavaScript is quite hard with no code hinting for 3JS. TypeScript gives us, it's a superset of JavaScript that gives us all kinds of code hinting, but it takes some config, right? So the configuration piece takes a little bit of time. Once we get it configured up, you're good to go, right? You don't have to do that again. And I provided a couple of examples online for you already, right, where we can take a look and see what those look like. So again, following the chapters of the book. Now it says chapter 12, and there's test number 3 that particular week, weeks 13 and 14. Again, I'll be coming up with a course plan that's a little bit more granular than this in terms of what we're going to be covering, when your assignments are due, and so on. Notice how it says assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a lot of assignments here. I won't be doing like 6 assignments. I said it'll be like 3 assignments for 10%, one project worth 20, and that'll give you your 50, right? So 50% assignments, 50% tests is where the split's going to be as opposed to what it is. Okay, questions around this thing and the course plan that I'm going to be coming out with. Any concerns that you guys have? Please bring them up now because I want to be able to address them. Again, from a requirement perspective, you need to know some JavaScript. If you don't know JavaScript, it's going to hinder you a little bit, right? It doesn't mean you won't be able to do well in this course. It just means you have to work harder, right? So let's ask that question. I want to just from a, I mean, people don't answer the question unless I kind of ask it, and they're afraid to put up their hands. So let's use a polleverywhere.com thing. I like kind of to do this once in a while. So I'm going to create a little flash poll here. I'm going to say, you know, how much JavaScript do you know? How much JavaScript do you know? Right? And because JavaScript is kind of a key here, right? None, right? That might be one. A little, right? You know, kind of a little means you did it in one course or something like that, and you kind of did a little bit of it. You know, I'm comfortable. And how about this? I'm a master, right? Gotta have a master in JavaScript here. Who's a master? I'm a master. All right, there we go. I'm going to create this poll. You can join me. You can answer this poll on, if you can use your phone to text me at learn to join to 37607. And once you join, you can answer the poll, or you can go to the website to do that as well. It's live right now. You can certainly go to pollev.com/learn, and it'll be anonymous for you guys to do this thing so that we can see the poll results. All right, a little. We got a little. Some people know it a little. All right, we got some, I'm comfortable. There's some people that do not know it at all, right? That's okay. I see that there's people that know it. I'm a master. A master. I love it. I want to know who the masters are. But it looks like some people, for the most part, you guys know it a little. And the reason why I'm asking it like this is people are afraid to answer, right? They're like, I don't want to answer that. I don't know it. This is anonymous. We're going to do a lot of these little polls because I want you guys to tell me how it goes. Some pretty good responses right there. So it looks like for the more than half of you kind of know it a little, right? Which means you've seen a little bit of the syntax, but you really don't know a lot about it. What a little means is that you really couldn't program an application with JavaScript, right? That's what a little means. Comfortable means you probably can program an application with JavaScript. You've probably done some work on the mean stack and stuff like that, or maybe some kind of AngularJS. Maybe you did a little bit of that. Some kind of other framework like Create.js. Maybe you did one of those if you're a graphical guy. These guys are just answering like crazy. You're just like slamming with extra users. You're just cheating. You're cheating, right? You masters. All right. Oh yeah. I see that there's 30% masters. Oh, we're just going up and down like crazy, right? So people are just making me crazy with it. I'll shut the poll down now. How about that? But anyways, you can't change the fact that most of you only know little, which is kind of a bad thing for me. But that means it's kind of I have to gauge from you guys how you guys are feeling in terms of your comfort with JavaScript. All right. So let me just bring up this PowerPoint. I'm not going to read the PowerPoints. I'm going to have a PowerPoint. It's going to be ready for you guys in PDF format by Wednesday. I'm not going to read the PowerPoint. I'm going to use it as a backdrop so we keep on track, so we actually get stuff done during class. Otherwise, we'll be distracted and we'll work on something else because Stephen will challenge me about stuff. Sorry, Stephen, I have to bring him up. He's going to say, challenge accepted, right? That's what he's going to say, right? What was that? Visual Studio Code. Right, so that's what it's going to be, right? So if you know VS Code, then you're going to be comfortable. If you don't know VS Code, you're going to learn some new stuff. All right, so the book, again, this is the book that we're using. And again, Lesson 1 is all about creating your first scene. The objectives of Lesson 1, which means week 1, right? So not just today. You're going to be, let's talk about a little bit of what WebGL is, kind of requirements on how to use Three.js. That's where we're going to really focus our time today. Requirements, kind of our setup, setting up our environment, all that stuff. How to get the source code, using the Three.js boilerplate that I've created for you guys, which is the way to go. I don't recommend you doing it on your own. And rendering and viewing a 3D object. We're probably going to get to that part probably by around 5, kind of objective 5, maybe objective 6 if we're lucky in terms of time frame today. I don't think we're going to get that far today. We're going to probably finish everything off by next day, day 2. All right, so what is WebGL? Well, WebGL is kind of based off of, if you know OpenGL, who knows OpenGL in the class? Anybody? So if you've worked with OpenGL before, with C++, I'm talking that OpenGL, a little bit of that, then it's going to be very familiar to you. A lot of the same stuff. How about Blender? Who knows Blender? Anybody know Blender? If you guys know Blender, if you guys done Blender a little bit, it's going to be very familiar to you. This whole 3D environment we're going to be creating is going to be like that, right? So you need to kind of know about 3D, right? And I got to talk about that a little bit before we move on to stuff that we're going to be talking about further on. So let's talk about a little bit about Blender. And the reason why I'm saying Blender is it's a good way of looking at 3D, without coding anything, right? So we can actually look at some kind of 3D scene. So the machine in front of you should have Blender, because I've asked for all the machines to have Blender. If you don't have it, please bring it up. If you can also download it from the Blender Foundation. But I just wanted to show you a couple things if you want to follow along. So I'm going to bring up my Blender. So what is Blender? Blender is a 3D editing program, if you will. Graphic allows you to do things with 3D objects. And I want to kind of define them. For people who've had me before, this will be a review for you. And so please bear with me, because you're going to hear the same stuff I've asked a million times, right? Over and over again. But it's really kind of key, yeah. Yeah. It's all on YouTube, right? So, guys like Doug, guys like Stephen and Josh and stuff, people who've had me before in other classes, right? Then you know what I'm going to ask right now. I'm going to ask you, what are the 3 things? Don't ask those. And Wendell, don't ask those questions. Don't answer the question for people who have been here before. I want the new people to answer the questions. What are the 3 things that all 3-dimensional objects have? 3 things. Hint, hint. I'm going to ask this. I'm going to ask this next week, right? On your quiz, right? Yeah, the hand up. Sorry?
Faces, edge, and corners.
Almost perfect.
Length, breadth, height.
I like his answer better, right? What was your name, man? What's your name?
Me?
Yeah, you. I don't know you. Who answered the question? You answered the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your name?
Fabio.
Fabio. I'm going to learn everyone's name slowly. It's going to take time. Fabio, you're almost correct. I would say that especially if I'm going to, I'm just going to zoom in here as I zoom into my cube here. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's faces for all 3-dimensional objects. There's edges, that's what they're called, and there's vertices, right? Those are the 3 things. So instead of corners, they're vertices. I'm going to ask you this question, those three things. So now it's a simple question that I need you all to know, because when we talk 3D, you need to understand. If I say, okay, the face of the object, it's just kind of naming, right? We have to understand this, kind of the glossary that I'm going to be talking about. So again, Blender, what is it? It allows us to manipulate, create objects. We can also do modeling. This object here that we're talking about here, this cube that you see in the middle of your screen, is a mesh, right? And what we can do is we can model this mesh by subdividing it and then kind of changing the proportions of the different faces, edges, and vertices in order for us to make whatever object we want. And this is nice, but this is not what we're going to be doing in this course. We're not going to be fooling around with Blender. It would be nice if we could do that with code, wouldn't you think? But it's very challenging to make something, to mold or sculpt something with code, pure code, other than doing it with Blender. There will be a class that we do Blender to 3JS, like an export of that. So you create an object in Blender, and then you export it to 3JS, and you use it on the web. We'll have a class like that, or 1 week where we do that kind of stuff. But that's not what we're going to be doing. I'm using Blender as an example of what three-dimensional space is. So there's 3 axes here that we have, right? The red axis is the x-axis, right? And we also have if you see the green axis here is the y-axis. And in this particular program, the blue axis is the z-axis, right? So we have z up in this program, right? But we use something like Maya, right? Or 3D Studio Max, it's not Z up, it's usually Y up, typically, right? Especially if you're using Unity. Unity is Y up, a Y up environment, right? But there are conversions when you kind of create stuff in Blender. You can convert from Blender to Unity, or from Blender to Maya and so on. They're kind of interchangeable. They have an interchange format called FBX that we can use to move from one to the other. But the idea here is that this manipulator right here, right? This is the manipulator arm that you can use to move it across axis. I can constrain the object by grabbing hold of my manipulator arm here with the left mouse button and moving it around, right? So if you let's try this out. So move it around here across the x-axis, right, or across the y-axis. And if you notice, I'm looking at this with a perspective camera. This is three-dimensional perspective. This is not three-dimensional or orthographic view. Orthographic is a flat view. All right. We need to understand these things because we're going to be programming in 3D. And if you've never done any kind of 3D work, you're going to go, what is he talking about? Right? So perspective kind of gives us so that if you notice the lines here in the grid, and by the way, each of these objects in the grid, each of these units in the grid are Blender units, right? In Maya, they're centimeters, if I'm not wrong. And in Unity, it's meters. But in Blender, it's Blender units, right? So too is it for 3JS. 3JS has 3JS units, all right? There are no actual meters or some kind of, or feet or something like that you're measuring in. But there are these Blender units, each of these grid lines, right? What they represent, right? So again, as I move this in 3 dimensions, you can see as the lines converge, right? You see that this line here, is converging somewhere in the middle, way off in the distance, right? That's the perspective that we have. If I move this object towards, kind of towards this other side, and I move it off, again, see that green line kind of, because it kind of goes off way towards the distance, way over here. Why? Because I've got the y-axis aligned in this way. If I rotate the scene, right, and if I do the line, you notice it goes off towards the right now, right? It's still a perspective, but my perspective has changed because of where I'm looking at the scene, okay? Questions so far, right? I don't want to lose anybody. If you've never done 3D, please put up your hand. It's okay never to have done 3D. But if you've done 3D before, or if you haven't done 3D before, this might be all new to you. And that's why I recommend, because I can't reteach Blender, because Blender, we talk about Blender in COMP391, right? But, because there's not a Blender course, right? But I highly recommend you do a little bit of Blender work. If you're going to do some homework at all and trying to understand 3D, take Blender. There's some really cool tutorials online to how to do it. In fact, I have some tutorials on my website, on my YouTube. You can always go to my channel and look at some Blender tutorials. And it kind of talks about everything from the interface on how to use Blender all the way to kind of sculpting and modeling, right? I'm not asking you to be a designer here. This isn't about that. It's understanding 3D that I want you to do, right? I don't expect you to ever be a designer. This is not a design college, right? We're a developer kind of environment. We're programming. but you need to understand 3D. And one of the best things to do is to actually use something like a Blender, a Maya, 3D Studio Max, or even Unity, or anything else out there that allows you to understand 3D. So again, 3 things for all 3D objects: edges, faces, vertices. I'm going to ask you that question next week on your quiz. Okay, so just be aware. And we're looking at this from a perspective. Things that we're going to be talking about today are things like materials, right? Notice that my object here, right? If you look at my object, it has this gray looking surface on it, right? A material is something that wraps my mesh. Okay, so my mesh is a cube. This is a cube geometry, as an example, right? That's what it looks like. I've got a material that kind of shrink wraps on top of my mesh. Right now, it has a basic color, which is the default color here, which is gray, right? If I want to change the color, I got to modify my material. My material is a container that I can use to change my color. So for me to do this, I'm just going to pull it over. If you notice on the top here in Blender, you have several tabs. I'm going to pull this out. And if you notice towards the right, 4 tabs in from the right, there is a little, what looks like a sphere. Right, I want you to click on that. And when you, by the way, if you want to select Blender objects, just as a refresher for those people who don't remember, you right-click instead of left-click. Right, left-clicking on the object doesn't do anything. Right-clicking selects, left-click actually allows you to manipulate. So again, if you notice here, you've got on the 4th tab in from the right here, and if you notice how I expanded this panel, each panel is totally expandable from any side you want. You can also turn them off and on and modify your view, your perspective, if you will, as you like. Okay, so this is the 4th tab, and notice that there's a material that's attached to this object, and it's just called material, right? And it has a couple of properties here that we're going to be talking about. These properties are very similar when we use 3JS, almost identical, in fact, right? We have something called the diffuse property, right? This is actually the material color, right? This diffuse. In Unity, it's called albedo, and in other programs as well. If I click in here, right, it'll give me a color wheel that I can certainly decide on. If I want to make so that this cube here, because it's our friendly cube, is more of a green color, I just kind of pick a green color. And automatically, my material now has a property that's more green-like in my diffuse channel. Hear my words, diffuse channel, right? And there's also a specular channel. Specularity is more like reflectivity, if you will. How the light bounces off an object, right? So you've got your specular channel here, and if you notice there's a bit of, in the example, in the preview here that we're looking at, you notice there's a bit of a shine on the sphere, right? This shine is an example or a preview of the specularity of the object, right? I can change this by changing the intensity here, so I can kind of move up and down. I can make it more matte by moving the slider to the left, and I can make it more reflective if I move the slider to the right. Right? So that's what it does. We're going to see examples of this when we code 3JS. All right? So again, specularity or diffuse, these two channels, they're called different things in different programs. They're pretty much the same though. So I want to make my cube here matte. So I'm just going to turn down the intensity of my specular channel to 0. Right? And now if you notice, it's a matte looking cube. Okay, I want to add a couple more things here because I want to kind of mirror what we're going to be doing today with 3JS. So I want to add a couple more meshes. I'm not going to change too much of what we have here. Let's add in a plane. And the way I can do that, of course, with my Blender's all about keys, shortcuts. So if you don't know Blender shortcuts, you're going to be confused. But in order for us to add a mesh really quickly, it's Shift-A. So your mouse has to be in this window right here, not pointing over here or not pointing over here, but in the middle. And we're going to press Shift-A. This little context menu is going to come up. And we want to choose a plane. Okay, there's the plane. If you notice, it intercuts right now in the middle of my cube. And that's okay. We can bring our plane kind of down below my cube. Notice how this is inside my cube. This is down below. You may have something similar or different, but you can make it similar. One thing that I want to do is I want to kind of change my perspective. I'm just going to rotate or pan around the scene so that way my axis, my manipulator arm here shows the green arrow pointing up towards the top of my page or my scene, and the red arrow pointing to the right. That means that Y is this way and X is towards this way. And then with my blue arrow, the Z coordinate pointing up. Okay. Notice how my cube seems fairly large, right, for what it is, and my plane is small. That's okay. We can modify that by pressing the S key. The S key, and again, my plane is currently highlighted. If I press the S key, I can scale my plane up, and if I can keep dragging, so it's very, very big. By the way, there's ways of doing this, of course, numerically, as opposed to me just dragging like this. But notice how now we have two objects, right? We have a plane and we have a cube. And one thing I also want to try and do is I'm going to right click on my cube to move it around. I'm going to select my cube by right clicking, move my cube around here. Notice how there's no shadows. You know, it's just two objects that are kind of near each other. That's all that's happening right now. If I was to zoom out, you can notice that there's a couple of other objects we haven't talked about that we're going to be talking about today with Three.js, right? And in all three-dimensional scenes, you can see them pretty much. One is the camera, which is right here. If I right-click on the camera, you can see that it's highlighted. And this camera, it's almost like if I want to look to see what the camera is looking at, it's actually, I got to zoom in here and change the perspective so it looks kind of like this. This is kind of where the camera is looking right now, with this fat arrow kind of pointing up. So this is what I'm going to be looking at when I look through my camera, right? I'm actually going to only see part of the cube from what it looks like, right? And part of the plane, but not the whole plane. You can change that, of course, by changing the camera's position and angle and so on. Think about the camera is rendering everything that's inside that arc of view. Okay. One more thing that's part of every scene pretty much is lights. Right? If you don't have any lights, nothing is illuminated, you can't see anything, everything is dark, right? So this object right here, if I click on it, right-click onto it, is the light source, and it's a spotlight. Sorry, it's a point light. Point light illuminates everything equally, right? Okay, cool. So we've kind of have a couple of them, right? And right now we're looking at it, and this is a lot to gather if you've never done 3D before, but we're looking at this whole thing here, this whole scene that we're looking at here. It's not really rendering correctly. It's rendering with basic shapes so that we can play with the shapes, we can modify them, we can move them around. We're not actually seeing the final result. In order for us to see something closer to the final result, we have to change the way we look at our shaders. And on the bottom here, I'm just going to kind of bring this up. You can see on the bottom here, right, you can notice how this is, right now we're kind of looking at it in solid. This is the viewport shading, solid. If I move to material, right, the shading changes. Right, so we actually get a little bit of glow from the light and some shadowing. But we don't really have the right look and feel for what it's going to look like in Three.js. Right? In order for me to get a better and cleaner look or closer to what it's going to look like in Three.js, press the N key when you look at the viewport. And then as you kind of scroll down here, there's under shading, the shading property, you can choose GLSL. When you choose GLSL, that's what we're really using we're very close to what we're using when we're using Three.js, GLSL, which is a shading, it's a type of shading that we're using. Okay, again, we're using OpenGL shading language to produce kind of these shadows. Notice how, again, right now I only have a point lamp, so the point lamp illuminates everything nicely, right? I can change this point lamp into a spot lamp by on the right here, with my lamp illuminated or selected. On the right, under the lamp property itself, I can make this into a spot by choosing spot. And now it looks like this. Okay, so again, it can only illuminate sections of my screen, right, as opposed to the whole screen. Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
in object mode, I can switch to material. There's no option.
From here, in object mode,
Yeah, exactly. There's no
make
option.
sure that you have to be in Blender Render at least, or Cycles Render in order for you to do that. If you go to Blender Game, it may not give you the same things. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I just wanted to give you a high-level view of 3D. This is not about Blender. This is about understanding 3D here, and that's why I kind of brought this into play. We're going to be creating a plane, a cube, and a sphere maybe by the end of the course, or the end of the class if we can get to it. It takes a little bit of doing. But there's a bit of setup we have to do to get there. And again, sometimes what I do when I use things in 3JS is I use Blender as a great way of setting up my scene the way I want it. And then I have an idea of what I want, right? It's almost like I'm presetting what my scene is going to look like, and then I program it with 3JS, right? Because it's kind of hard to conceive of what it's going to look like or plan what it's going to look like your scene without some kind of program to help you. And Blender's a great way of doing that. Okay, so when I ask you to do something in assignments, I fully expect you to do something like use Blender, Maya, 3D Studio Max, whatever you're comfortable with, to kind of put objects into the scene in a certain position, because that might be what I'm asking you to do, and then render them with code. All right? All right, so that's Blender. Any questions around? Again, this is not about Blender course. I'm just talking about 3D. Again, so let's just review what we've talked about. Edges, vertices, and faces are a part of every three-dimensional object. Here's something else. Every scene that you're going to make pretty much is going to have a camera, right? A light, and some kind of mesh, right? So there's the other things. The other question I might ask you next week, right? What does every scene have, right? In with 3JS, right? Some kind of camera. You're going to have some kind of light source, and you're probably going to have a mesh, right? Because that makes sense, right? Because that's what 3D is all about. There's 3 vertices that we're talking about, right? And I always want you to think about this. Every program, kind of aligns its vertices in a different way. 3JS aligns with Z up. Okay, that's how it points. If you notice, it's going to be a Z up approach. It's not going to be a Y up approach. Like, for example, like Maya or 3D Studio Max or Unity, right? And that's good because Blender and 3JS are kind of compatible that way. So when you can visualize something in Blender, you can code it in 3JS, and you can use one program to help you with kind of coding the other. Okay, I'm going to minimize Blender. I'm not going to use Blender right now. But I want to do is set up our environment a little bit. So we talked about WebGL. And again, one of the things that WebGL uses API, it kind of uses a form of OpenGL, and GL stands for Graphics Library. Hey, this is a question on next quiz, right? GL, Graphics Library, right? So WebGL is your web graphics library then, right? And what we want to do is we use some kind of canvas, HTML5 canvas or SVG, something like that to create our look and feel for WebGL. Again, what we want to do is you're going to see that it's kind of a shader-based API. And look what it says, using GLSL, which is exactly what we did here in Blender. If I go to Blender and if I go back to the shading type, it's GLSL, right? So this is where it's compatible with what we're doing here in this program, right? So the same kind of look and feel that you're going to get in 3JS is what you can probably produce something like that in Blender. I'll be honest with you, I can do a lot more in Blender than I can do in 3JS in a much shorter time, but only because I have a graphic user interface to do that, a UI, right? Whereas with 3JS, it's all hand-coded. Okay. So what does it allow us to do? I mean, what is 3JS anyway? It's a library, right? And it's made by one dude, and his name is, he calls himself Mr. Doob, actually, up online. And he's produced a couple of libraries out there as well. But one of the things that it allows us to do is, again, simple and complex 3D geometries. That's really cool. Animating objects. We can animate objects around, just like we can with Blender, right? Or any other three-dimensional program, right? We can apply textures and materials. And there's a difference between a texture and a material. Who knows what that is? And by the way, the guys who know me already can answer in this one. What's the difference between a texture and a material? You know the answer? No. Okay. Material, remember, is that shrink wrap that goes around the mesh, right? A texture is actually, if you think about it, an image that I can draw, or if I want to render around the material itself. So the material is the container for our texture. Okay? I can't have a texture without a material. I can have a material without a texture, though. Materials are container. It may or may not have a texture, right?
So you can do the texture on material.
I can draw a texture, right? I can have an image that I can download, and there's some really cool sites for that. One of the ones I'm going to be using a lot is, and if I go to, there's some really cool tools I'm going to share with you, right, for this. So if I go to, 3D Warehouse is one place we can get stuff. But what I want to use is I want to get some place where I'm going to get textures, right? So if I go, kind of 3D textures, I want to download, that kind of stuff. And if I look for that online, you notice that there's 3dtexture.com or textures. If I just go textures, free textures, I think there's Texture King, and there's a bunch of other ones out there as well. And there's a bunch of other sites that we're going to go to. Here's Texture King, that we can go to grab free textures. And all the textures are basically things like this, right? They're kind of images or photos. And what you can do is to take those photos or images and wrap them around a mesh to make it look like there's a little bit of more geometry than it actually has. It's an illusion, right? So you can actually create a rough-hewn wall texture that you can put on a material that's part of a mesh. Whew, right? Terminology. But at the end of the day, that's the difference. So material and texture, two different things. Material is the container for the texture. Texture cannot live without a material. Okay? All right. So I think that's one of the ones I want to cover. But so it allows you to do that. It allows you to play with textures and materials. Different light sources, different kinds of light sources. We just saw two of them. There's a spot, right? And there's also a point. Point light, spotlight. Two different kind of lights. And there's many more. We can use, like it says here, loading objects from 3D modeling software. So I can do it with Blender, export it out into a JSON file, load it into 3JS. We're going to do that later on in the course, right? Some post-processing effects. We want to render the scene, and sometimes it takes us a couple of hours to render the scene because we're making it very, very specific. You can do that with cycles render in Blender as well, right? It can take quite a long time. Sometimes people, in the past, we used to have something called a rendering farm, where we actually would render a really complex scene, photorealistic scene, with a piece of software like Blender or 3D Studio Max or Maya or Lightwave or something else. And they still have that kind of requirement today for film effects. Okay. Here's one you want to look at that's done with 3JS. It's kind of a neat one. It's www.vil.ee/I. Try this out in your browser as something to break the ice with you guys, so that you guys don't sleep. Something that's made purely with 3JS. It's kind of a neat little thing. Let's see what if you guys can bring it up. So vil.ee/I. I'll bring it up too. Yeah, it's kind of neat, right? So if I go HTTP, what was that? vil.ee. What was that?
The eyeball's Chrome.
Yeah, man. It's neat. You can change it around, right? So this is what it looks like. If you notice, it starts off as Chrome, and if you move it around, it becomes a real eyeball, right? And you can change the eyeball. It looks like, see how it morphs from this kind of a bluish eyeball. You can change. There's a little control palette on the right-hand side that you can change from blue to green. And notice how when you change the green eye, there's a bit of more redness in the eye. And you can also go to Cyborg. There's different changes. So you make it more of a kind of a what looks like an eye of a, maybe not a cyborg, but maybe some kind of camera, right? That's what it looks like. You can also change the background environment here, right? So there's a background environment of circles, a circus, queen, and so on. And you can change the environment, and every time you make a selection here in the control panel, it changes what's rendered in the scene. All right, so again, all this stuff done with 3JS, so some really, really cool effects that you can play with. And you're going to ask, so this advanced graphics stuff, why do I need it? Like, why am I doing this course, right? How am I going to use advanced graphics in my day-to-day job? And I'll tell you right now, this is where we're all going, guys. We're moving away from 2D on the web, and we're moving towards 3D, right? And enhanced kind of reality, if you will, augmented reality. And the way we're going to do that is through these kind of 3D objects. So learning it now is going to help you later, help you to compete if you're interested in doing any kind of UI work at all. And by the way, you're going to be programming this stuff. There's going to be someone else maybe that's going to be designing it, right? But you need to understand it. You need to understand 3D. You need to understand texturing and modeling, and not necessarily do it. So when we grab models, I may ask you to do one mesh. There might be a time I ask you to do a mesh or something in this course. But for the most part, you'll be I'm going to be giving you instructions, and you're going to just follow those instructions to create what I've asked you to do, which is pretty much what what a designer might ask you to do, right? So again, how do I incorporate this 3D stuff in my web pages? How do I make my my interfaces more interesting and attractive, right? That's what we're learning about. And again, there's a lot of other applications as well. Medical applications, right? There's military applications to 3D, especially with simulations that you can run across browser. One good thing about doing things with 3JS is it's cross-browser. It works, on any platform. It works with the latest version of Android, iOS. So it'll work on a phone. Try it out on your phone. See how this thing works. Now, if you notice, my machine is spinning. It's like I hear the fan going on my little Mac, right? Again, I'm doing a couple things at once. I'm recording on the web, right? I'm rendering this thing for you. It's recording my voice, doing a bunch of stuff at the same time. But however, right, it's able to do that. On your phone might get a little hot. I don't know if you ever try and do any kind of three-dimensional scene on your phone. But if you have a later, like kind of a more recent phone, like an iPhone 6 or some kind of Android, latest version of Android, you're going to see it gets a little hot because it's trying to do what a real CPU is doing, and it's kind of rendering something in 3D. All right, so again, 3JS has lots of capability, right? And that's the really cool part about it, right? But it can be very complex. And why? Because if we were going to do stuff, based right off of OpenGL, the OpenGL shading language is really hard, right? Are you good? You have your hand up. You're good to go? Oh, sorry. So that's why we use 3JS. 3JS kind of makes it easier for us to code this way. So again, we talked about cross-browser. It really works across everything. Until recently, IE and Edge didn't kind of work until IE 11. Obviously now it works. So kind of Windows 8 timeframe, Windows 7 is kind of working. And now it's pretty much most modern browsers support 3JS and WebGL. Questions so far? Okay, just kind of an overview. I'm going slow, believe it or not. So how do we get this stuff going? How do I make this go? So here's where the requirements to use 3JS. Okay, so first things first. What I want you to do is I want you to download Visual Studio Code, right? If you don't have it, the machines in front of you may or may not have it right now. So if you take a look at the machine in front of you, it may have Visual Studio Code. Where do I get that? If I kind of type in Visual Studio Code here up on the browser, it'll take me to code.visualstudio.com. And this is where you get it. It's a cross-platform text editor, right, that's available for Mac, OS X, and Linux. It's created by, Windows, Mac, and Linux, and it's created by Microsoft, right? Visual Studio obviously is still powerhouse, kind of IDE, integrated development environment. This is not an IDE. This is a text editor, but it gives us a lot of little features that our Visual Studio environment gives us, and is a very popular choice for a text editor these days. So please, if you don't have it already, download it and install it on your machine. Why am I using Visual Studio Code? Why? Because it gives us really good support for JavaScript libraries, as well as TypeScript, which is what this thing is built with. So TypeScript built Visual Studio Code. And I've been talking about TypeScript from the kind of, moment one when we kind of got together. What is TypeScript? Let's go to that one. So I want you to go to typescriptlang.org to see what TypeScript is for a second. Again, there's languages out here that do kind of the same thing, right? Like, for example, JSX is kind of one of the newer ones that help us transpile, that move from more of an object-oriented language that has stricter typing than JavaScript to JavaScript. And what you can do is you can use classical inheritance as opposed to prototypical inheritance that is included with JavaScript, right? You can use classical inheritance, things we understand. So if you're someone who knows C#, who knows C#? You should all know C# in this class, right? Then TypeScript will be very familiar to you when you use it, right? You'll look at it and go, I kind of get this. And don't be afraid. It's not like you're not learning JavaScript, because TypeScript is JavaScript, especially since TypeScript is more moving towards the newest version of JavaScript, which is ES6, ECMAScript 6, or Harmony, or what do they call it, JavaScript 2015, right? That's the latest version of it. It's not fully supported yet. JavaScript 2015, Harmony, ES6, whatever you want to call it these days, right? However, it's very close to this. It's very close. So TypeScript and ES6, ECMAScript 6, the latest version of JavaScript, almost identical in terms of what they can do, right? And they're kind of converging. Slowly, they're coming closer. TypeScript really super supported by Microsoft. It's not something that's going to die anytime soon. That's why I didn't choose something like CoffeeScript, which is still out there. There's another kind of language very similar to that. JSX, which is kind of newer. It looks very interesting as well. Go, Dart, they're all similar languages that kind of do very similar stuff. They kind of take a language that's more structured and they move it into JavaScript, right? And that's what we're going to be doing with us. Why am I using TypeScript and not pure JavaScript? It's faster. It's way faster for me to create applications with TypeScript. I can do it twice as fast. And again, I don't know, I got here's some testimonials. What about, Stephen, you were in my, or Wendell, how about that crazy, web game programming class we did last semester? How did you feel? Would you not use TypeScript?
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't use TypeScript ever again? No? He's lying. He's lying. He would rather you'd rather use JavaScript instead of TypeScript by itself?
No, I'd rather use XML.
Right. It's not going to happen. But the point is that, see, he's not a great, I was hoping for a testimony. Yes, Tom, it's really fantastic. But of course he didn't tell me that.
Wendell.
Wendell?
Yes, Tom, that's really good.
See, yeah, that's perfect. That's what I wanted. That's what I want to hear. And the reason why I'm saying that is because really JavaScript is hard. It doesn't give you a lot of code hinting, right? If you use JavaScript in a text editor or in an IDE, it's super hard. Like we're talking about, it doesn't give you a lot of feedback as to what's wrong. It'll fail silently all the time, even if you use strict mode. Sometimes strict mode won't fail, but you don't know what's happening. It won't give you kind of code hinting on what's going on. So TypeScript allows us to get really good tool support for when we build JavaScript applications. And that's why I don't just do it here in this course. I do it every one of my courses that I use in the web. Because, and again, I mean, if I was going to do a pure JavaScript course, yeah, I would start off with JavaScript and then move towards TypeScript, because if you've never done JavaScript before. But the idea is this. Let's do a little bit of playing around. Let's go into the play, where it says play on typescriptlang.org. Notice how on the left you have some, when it finally comes up, you have some information over here. And what I'm going to do, just to give you an example of what this does, I'm going to wipe this out, this greeter class here, right? Let's wipe this class out. And let's make this person class. Like, think about a person, right? So normally what we do is, if we're going to learn something like C#, we create a class, and we use the class keyword like this, class, right? And we put person, and then in kind of braces, that would be inside of our code block here in person. I'm just going to make this a little larger for you guys, so you guys can see it a little better, right? But, oh, that's too big. But I want you to take a look at this. So here's class person. This is what it really produces in JavaScript. So this is what the class person would look like on the JavaScript side. I don't know. To me, I mean, this is just a container, right? Okay, now I want to make a constructor for the person class, right? So here's my constructor. And you know what? I want to take in a name from my person, right? Because every person has a name, right? And you know what? I want to specify that the name is of type string, right? So here's my constructor function, right? Well, this is what it looks like on this side, and well, here's the JavaScript side on this side, right? Notice what you've got on the JavaScript side. You've got like a function within a function. And this is kind of this syntax here, and again, it's in also immediately, kind of executing function, right? That's what it's in right now, an IFI, if you will, right? And this is what this piece is right here. From here to here, up to here, this is what's called an IFI in JavaScript, right? So, I mean, to me, simple, insane. Right? Like, syntax not easy to follow especially if you don't know JavaScript. If you've never learned JavaScript before, and if you're not a JavaScript person, I don't know. To me, the right side is way hard, right? Okay, so let's take a look at this, right? So if I want to have a constructor, what am I going to do? I don't really have a name property here, but I'm going to assign a name property. And in JavaScript, it's kind of loosely typed, right? So you can kind of assign a property on the fly, right? Well, here's where we don't want to do that. And I want to kind of create a name property here, which is going to be of type string, right? And you know what? I also want to make my name property private. So let's make it like, we use the private keyword, and we use underscore for everything private here in my class as a convention. Okay, so whenever you see private, if you ever do a course with me, if I ever do a private variable with you in my course, it's going to have an underscore. The underscore just signifies that it's a private variable. That's all it is. Okay, it's a convention. You don't have to do it. I'm asking you to do it though. All right, cool. So here's private. This name is a string, and I take into my constructor a name that's a string. And you know what I want to say? I want to use this keyword. So this dot name underscore name now is equal to name, right? That's what I'm saying here, right? Oops. Okay, here we go, right? So I've got my person class, and I listen for my name in the constructor, and then I assign it to my name instant, my private instance variable, which is up here. So here's my, these are all my private instance variables up here, right? That's what I got up here, right? In my class. And in here, this is my constructor. I'll just comment this thing out for you, constructor, right? And we'll just add some comments here. Notice how on the right side, it's adding it in too, right? But notice how that's all this is. All I've got is this, like, you know, this name property or this name instance variable, and I'm assigning it here in my constructor. Well, right now my person class doesn't really do anything, but let's give it a method, right? And it's going to be a public method, right? That's going to be called speak. We'll make it capitalized as well, speak. We can make it lowercase. By convention, it's usually lowercase in JavaScript like this, speak. And what we want to do is we want to kind of say that when the person speak, you know, he says something like, you know, whatever. And we want to say this person said something. So we want to say something kind of like a console.log, which is the way to say kind of like kind of pump something out to the console. It's like a print statement in Swift, right? As an example. Or a system.out.println in Java, right? As an example. We want to kind of print this out, and we're going to say something like this. We're going to say, you know, the person, but instead of the person, we want to say the name of the person, right? So we're going to say this dot underscore name, right, which is the private variable, plus space says, you know, as an example, hello, right? And if you notice on the right-hand side, this is what it does. Notice how it's very similar, except for this piece, person.prototype.speak, right? That's how you create a method that's part of a class, a prototypal class in JavaScript, right? So again, much more complex syntax, and without some kind of typing mechanism, it wouldn't work. Okay, so fine, I've created my person class, and I want to use it now. How do I use it? C#, it would be like this, right? I would say, well, var is the variable declaration. Tom, right, is equal to a new person, right, where I'm going to pass in his name as an example, right? And you know what? I'm going to go one step further with this one. Instead of just saying var Tom, I'm going to go var Tom, well, you know what? It's a person, right? Var Tom is a person. I'm actually typing Tom, although I'll be honest with you, you can also, if I didn't use the person here, right? So colon indicates the type, just like it does up here. Colon indicates the type in TypeScript. Even if I don't do this, there's type inference that goes on. So if I say Tom is equal to a person, then automatically Tom is of type person, right? It kind of infers the type, right? With TypeScript. It does the same thing with JavaScript as well. In all modern languages like Swift, right? All right, so so that's kind of cool. So Tom is a person. Well, we can say that Tom then, right? I want to make Tom speak, right? And I can just do it like this, right? So Tom speak. If I was to run this thing, yeah. Var is the variable declaration. So I'm declaring Tom as the variable, and person is the type of that Tom is assigned to. I'm creating a shape for the Tom variable. It's the same shape as the person class. It's a reference to person, right? Right, and then I'm saying new person is, I'm using the new keyword to instantiate a new object in Tom, right? Tom is going to be the container for the new object of type person.
So why didn't you use var in the underscore name?
Up here,
Yeah.
it's part of the class, and you don't do that. You don't use var inside of a class declaration in TypeScript. But if you notice on the right-hand side here, did we use var this dot name? Name? No, we didn't do it either. This is on the JavaScript side. This is what it would look like as well. We're saying, hey, when I use the this keyword in JavaScript and I create a reference to a property name, right? As soon as I assign it something, it exists. That's how it works in JavaScript. It didn't exist before, but as soon as you assign something, if I say this dot blah blah, the context that it lives in, that this keyword lives in, automatically creates a property. And again, this is another kind of subject of confusion for some people who've never done JavaScript before, and hatred. They're like, I hate that. I'm a developer, and it's completely unstructured, and I don't like it. I never want to use JavaScript again, right? But now, with TypeScript, you're like, hey, really cool. I know C#, I've known Java. TypeScript is pretty close to what I understand, right? And the person who created TypeScript actually is a C#. That's what he does. He does, you know, he was a developer for C# for Microsoft, right? And you might say, hey, well, this is cool, Tom, but is it really going to be applicable to my job? Because I want to program in JavaScript, right? Well, yeah, because you know what? Angular 2, which is around the corner, which is supported by Google. So now we have two powerhouses, Microsoft and Google. They're using TypeScript, right? So that, to me, is a very good indicator why I would use TypeScript over JavaScript any day of the week, right? If I was going to make a large application, which you're going to make. This is what we're doing. You cannot, when it comes to game development, and when it comes to graphics programming, right? It's a larger type of application that you cannot outthink in your head. All right. If I give you, hey, make a calculator application in Java, like a rinky-dink calculator, you're going to outthink it in your head. You can't outthink a game. You have to plan the game. You can't outthink a graphics application. You're going to have to plan it out. And I'd rather use this for any large applications. So again, JavaScript over here, TypeScript over here. If I click run, what does it do for me? Well, it doesn't do anything right now because if you notice, there's nothing that pops up. But if I right-click and go to my inspector, and if I click console, right, it says Tom says hello, right? That's the message I get in my console. And I got that right from my playground, right? So here's my playground. And again, I click run. Now, if I want this instead of console.log, if I want it to be an alert, right, a JavaScript alert, I just got to change this console.log to alert, which is really annoying. But I could do that. And if I click run, it's going to pop up a little alert that says Tom says hello, right? So again, to me, the thing that convinced me to go to TypeScript from JavaScript is this. Beautiful, ugly, right? Hold on, let me do it again. Beautiful, ugly, right? To me, ugly syntax is always harder to learn for beginners, right? I understand this. I get it. And there's some really powerful things you can do with this. JavaScript is really super flexible and powerful, right? But really confusing for people who've never seen it before and has lousy type, kind of code hinting. So when we come back from break, let's take a 10-minute break so I don't kill yourselves. I know Josh is already killed by me, right? I can see him already. He's dying, right? Let's take a 10-minute break, come back, and then we'll set up our environment, okay? Let's do that. And I'll stop recording.